Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Revival of America podcast. This is Jenny. I'm the owner and the host of the Revival of America. Today we have SG and Anon in the house, everybody. So please, if you have a question for SG over here on Telegram, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute your mic. And at some point, you can ask SG your question. And if you're over on Rumble Live or X Live, feel free to put your questions down in the comment area, and I will read those as well to SG at some point in this podcast. Also, to everybody, please be careful who you listen to, who you follow, what you're putting in your mind. Um, I'm going to tell you, I was sitting in a couple spaces the other day, and wow, oh wow, oh wow, did these trolls, agitators come in and just blow up that space? It's becoming so obvious. They were talking about, of course, Israel. They were Israel first people, and I mean. I was in that space for 5 minutes and I'm like, I could tell. I heard it right away. It's just becoming so obvious, everybody. So, and maybe not to all of you, but to me, because I know kind of what I'm looking for. But I'm just letting you know, guys, it is wild. It started out with just a couple people, and then all of a sudden it was like a herd came in. I don't know if they were bots or if they were just, followers of each other and coming in trying to tag team and just blow up the space. It was a great space, but then it went left and went all about Bibi, Israel, and all this kind of stuff. So, guys, it's all kinds of different things, but I'm telling you, these guys are showing their colors. The more they talk, the more they expose themselves. So, of course, yeah, give them a little bit of rope, they hang themselves. But at some point, you gotta get that mic away from them, because what's happening is they're putting out a lot of bad information, and those poor people in the audience are confused, right? They're asking these questions, they're not understanding, and it's just that's not what we're trying to that's not what I'm trying to do, right? And the people in here for the truth, that's not what we're trying to do. So at some point, those people need to have a mic taken away and not be able to have a mic again, because they are paid to do that. Everybody, they are paid to put that confusion out there, to put that disinformation out there, because it's happening. These people are getting confused. They might be feeling good, but then you get people like this in there, and then they just get too much of talk time, and then the audience starts thinking, well, wait a minute, why are they letting them talk so much if this isn't factual, right? So anyway, just be careful, guys. The flip floppers, the inconsistencies is another one. Just really be careful, guys. That's why I do what I do with my guests. Is I keep it pretty simple, but their guests are very consistent. The message is very spot on. It's very consistent. So please, just everybody, be careful who you listen to and really what you're putting in your mind, because it's wild out there. Also, too, if you get a random message from me, a DM, saying that pretending to be me or any of my guests, know that myself or my guests will not reach out to you randomly and ask you if you're ready for the scare event, financial information, or crypto. Please block, report them, and let me know so I can make sure they're not in any of my channels, because I will block and get them out of these channels, because I'm here not only to share the truth with you guys as well as my guests, but I'm here to protect my channel, you guys as the members, as well as my guests that come in here, SG and On, Field McConnell, everybody. So please just let me know, and just know that it's not me. There are people out there that are trying to pretend to be Derek Johnson, myself, SG and On, Captain Kyle. It's happening to all of us, but just know that we don't randomly reach out to you guys. Okay, so please block and report them. Also, to everybody, if you come in late to this podcast, or if you want to listen to the replay, share it with a family or a friend. We are being listened to in 150 countries. So we are making a lot of great positive noise. We are on the right track. I am being told that. So that's a good thing. So hopefully I'll give you guys some solace to know that we are giving you some good information here at the Revival of America. But please go follow the podcast host or my social medias, because I put everything over there as well. The podcast hosts are iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Breaker, PocketCast, Podbean, Riverside, Amazon Music. Social medias are Jenny JERREAD Facebook at Jenny_JERREAD X, at JJERREAD Rumble, at JJERREAD True Social, at JJERREAD Instagram, the Revival of America right here on Telegram, and the Revival of America over on YouTube. And then, too, many of you guys are sending me emails regarding a story that you may have. That's great. I appreciate it. Thank you. But what I'm seeing is you're sending it to my Revival of America at yahoo.com. Please don't send them over there because they're getting buried in all the other emails that I get on a daily basis. Send them to TROA submissions@yahoo.com. Yeah, that email is strictly for stories and people's journeys that want to get on the podcast. You give me a little synopsis of what your story is, your journey, and then what I do is I vet them because, yes, guys, I have the scammers that would just want to make up a fake story to get on a podcast. If I believe it's legitimate, I will reach out to you via email. We'll get your voice, your story on the podcast. Because remember, buddy, it's your voice, your journey that's going to help shape this new world we're coming into. But if you have an email for me personally about Field, about John Baxter, about SG Anon, whoever, maybe email me at therevivalofamerica@yahoo.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So bear with me, everybody. I got a day gig that takes precedence to the podcast because it pays my bills, right? So I do this in my free time. But bear with me, guys. I'll get to you as soon as I can, and then I'll respond to your question or whatever it may be. And regarding Field, a lot of you are asking me about Field. I say it all the time here on the show. It was a little bit premature. I think he was a little excited to come back, but I did speak to his daughter a couple weeks ago, and they're going to focus a little bit more on his healing because that is priority first and foremost. And I totally agree with that. I want him to be 100% before he comes back. So I am actually going to reach out to his daughter today just to kind of see what the progress is, how he's doing. So I'll keep you updated on that as well. And then update on the shows, guys. So today will be the last day of the shows for the Revival of America. I'm going to stay consistent on my shows unless I really have to do one on the weekend like I did with Juan, or maybe a Tuesday, Thursday night. But I'm going to do shows on Monday and Wednesdays, whether it be 4 shows or 3 shows. So it's either going to be 6 or 8 shows a week, depending obviously on my schedule. But today we've got obviously SG and On, and then after SG we've got Dallas, everything RV news, and then after Dallas we have Rick Anson from Anti-Aging Peptides, and then Brain IQ Health. These are all natural alternative things, supplements and healing peptides. If they're not synthetic, if they're all natural, if they're the amino acids. These are all the rave that's coming to be replacing a lot of this big pharma stuff, guys. So you may want to come in and listen to that because that's going to be super exciting. And then over on X later tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, everybody, we're going to have Silk. I call it the comedy show with Silk because if you've been in there with Silk, she's a hoot. We laugh a lot. She's just a great time. So that will be 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on my X space. So without further ado, as SG Anon always says, he is in the house. I want to welcome him. And he's going to be with us as his schedule permits. Also, we have decided it's going to be every third Wednesday. We're going to kind of keep him consistent like we do Captain Kyle and Derek Johnson and everybody. So in that way, you guys can kind of know when he's going to be here. So we have decided, unless that's changed since I spoke to Laura about it, SG, you can correct me, but it looks like every third Wednesday of the month around hopefully this time. So hello, SG. Is that still good for you?
It is, and thank you for having me back. It's good to be here.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's always been forever when you come in that I haven't talked to you, but it's been a month. And so much is going on. I'm just going to I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure the audience does too, but I don't know if you want to start us out with anything particular that you're working on that you want to share with the audience, or if you just want me to go right into some of my questions and then go to the audience.
Well, it's fascinating. I think we should tee it up a little bit, if you'll allow me to here, Jenny, because we're moving into yet another phase in this long puzzle to put together the geopolitics of the world in a way that allows for a sustainable and lasting peace and naturally rebuffs certain types of manipulation and infiltration, because espionage tactics that are appropriate in the West maybe aren't appropriate in certain areas of the global South. You have cultural paradigms you have to deal with, ancestral paradigms, and just the way that different people and different groups and regions think about certain things. And so we're seeing this puzzle work slowly but surely over time. Really, we've been seeing this certainly since the first Trump presidency, but in a rapid fashion after the Russian military operation began in Ukraine in 2022, and people started acknowledging, oh, wait, this is a serious period of geopolitical shifting. There's going to be territorial exchange. There's going to be, certainly financial exchange and different remunerations going on. And as President Trump has highlighted many, many times, this is an ongoing situation. it's a chess game being made with moves at the highest levels. These are the words directly from the commander-in-chief just last year. So looking at what we've got right now, we've moved out of this Iranian phase, at least for the moment. That has accomplished a great deal of reorientation of worldwide energy markets. It has extracted a significant amount of the intelligentsia community infiltration inside of the Middle East. Not all of it, certainly, but a good amount, especially from the Gulf states. It has paved the way for the new Iraqi government, currently seating itself right now as we speak in Baghdad, to approach the domestic terrorism and terrorist group policy with much more vigor and much more gusto, because now Tehran and the very large intelligence serpent that was in Tehran for a long time is not right over top of them. And the reason I keep using the word intelligence or intelligence community is because I want your audience to understand that we're not dealing with the governments of any particular country. You're dealing with factions within these governing structures. Some of them are forward facing, some of them are shadow state control. The shadow state control and leverage is a lot stronger in states where that intelligence community infiltration has gone on for a very long time. And of course, Iran is one of those examples. So now we have the way paved for new domestic policy inside of Iraq that's going to affect the financial world pretty significantly. We also have the way being paved for the rearmament, the quick rearmament of the entirety of the Gulf states. And where is that coming from? It's coming from all of the aid that the USA has promised the Iranians, as long as they, make do on their side of the agreement, as long as they make good on the things that they said they were going to. And so as we look at those, conditions for rebuilding and restructuring and things of that nature, as we look at how this entire conflict has deeply affected China and caused China to become much more ingressed upon itself and focus much more on its immediate block in Northeast and Southeast Asia and along its borders, perhaps in the Afghan, Mongolia, Caucasus regions. As we've watched all of this happen, this tees up this next phase, this next period that we're going into. And it seems to me that this next period is likely to be more of the same flavor, but now becoming more publicly obvious as to what the true intent and the real purpose behind a lot of this stuff really is. For example, we saw just recently in the last 36 hours, Turkey come out, and I think it was one of the Turkish ministers, I don't think it was Erdogan, but it was one of the ministers that came out and described Israel as becoming a worldwide and international threat. In other words, a problem to the stability of the entirety of the world. Now, of course, Israel shot right back and said, funny words coming from the Turks, given their history, is basically the paraphrased response. We also have rhetoric out of Israel from the minister of their equivalent of the Ministry of War, Ministry of Defense, coming out of Israel saying that they need to raise and destroy every structure in Lebanon to ensure that there is total security for the Israeli state, which, of course, that flies right in the face of what President Trump said not 24 hours ago when he was meeting with the Emir of the UAE, the Emir of Qatar. Pardon me on the titles here, not my strong suit, but the heads of state of those particular nations. And he stated, you don't need to target an entire apartment building if you're looking for, a few terrorists. There's ways to get to those individuals. There's surgical methods that we deploy. And he talked about the United States, and we deploy them very well, and those types of things. And basically what that was it was a shot across the bow, now from Washington, D.C. to Tel Aviv, creating this rift, creating this space. And at the same time, Washington is now rearming the entirety of the Gulf states through these payments that are eligible to be issued to Tehran, as well as to Doha, as well as to Riyadh, as well as to Bahrain and the UAE and all of these other places. They are all eligible to participate in this rebuilding aid. And so all of those states, in my estimation, Jenny, are going to prepare themselves for what the wild animal in the room over in Tel Aviv may end up doing next. And I don't want to keep the focus for this tee up as we go into our conversation today. I don't want to make it entirely on Israel because, again, we're not talking about nation states. We're talking about functional government factions behind and in front of the levers of power inside these nations. And you have the same infestation and problem inside of Ankara and inside of Cairo as you do, and frankly, it's still inside of Damascus, as you do there in Tel Aviv and in the Jerusalem area. And so looking at this rattling that seems to be coming, it very much appears that we're going to have some riffraff coming between Turkey and Tel Aviv that almost certainly is going to draw Syria and Lebanon deeper into whatever riffraff and conflict that spawns out. We know that the rest of the Gulf is likely to respond in a very negative fashion. But now what will happen? What's going to happen is that the Gulf states and Iran, ancestral Persia, are going to come to the discussion in a united format, in a united forum. You're going to see the Sunnis and the Shias begin to blend, begin to meld with one another. That doesn't necessarily solve several hundred years of differences, right? And I'm not suggesting that it should, but you're going to see some alignment on some basic fundamental concepts about their region, about their area of the world, and about how best for everyone to get along peaceably and fairly. And that, in my opinion, Jenny, is why you're now seeing the White House begin to create the space necessary to have whatever problematic factions left over in Egypt, left over in Saudi Arabia, left over in Turkey and Syria, and potentially even Iraq. These factions are going to draw themselves out, and the U.S. is not going to be the big brother in the room with the ball bat this time.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay, that's good. That's great info. I haven't attacked that deep into it. I was going to talk to you I mean, I love that you brought that up though, because you're talking about Iran, and we know Trump is over there at the G7 right now, and he basically went into, I don't know, did you see the clip where he came in and he told everybody there that he was the boss, and that he was
I
gonna
did.
read, yeah, he was gonna read in a press conference the Iranian deal that he has with them, so it's gonna force the lying stream media to tell the truth. Do you want to touch on that, or have you even seen that conversation that he had?
Well, I saw snippets of it. I did not get a chance, unfortunately, to watch the whole segment. I wish that I had, because I know that each of these segments happening at the G7 is powerfully important. And for your audience out there, especially those that are researchers and really want to know more and examine more, you have to sort of examine the entirety of the geopolitical landscape at different levels. And anything that happens in the presence of the broader international community is absolutely important to know about, because as we move forward here, you're going to see a lot of that level brought down to that nation state, head of state, one-on-one discussion level. In other words, the things that have been happening at extremely high echelons of power outside of public knowledge and public reporting for a long time are slowly coming more and more and more into the public space through the lamestream media, through the alternative media, through various citizen source podcasts and information outlets, through journalists, through reporters, through people that are in governmental or military positions that are choosing to say things either publicly or anonymously. All of it equates to this broad movement of these hidden levers down into the public space so that everyone can look up and see them. And I'm sort of being metaphorical in my expression here, side to side, up, however you want to think about it. But they're coming into a publicly visible part. And President Trump's commentary at the G7, the entirety of the way that he's been there, it's very much the commander-in-chief in charge of a broader operation, as well as an American head of state in charge of ensuring what is best for those regions that are still interconnected to this hydra that President Trump knows he's sitting on top of, riding it kind of like David, if you will, and being able to disconnect them from that hydra in such a fashion that does not cause the bleeding out of their societies. And believe it or not, that is a consideration that has to happen here. As NATO disconnects from itself and from one another, and especially from the United States, you're going to see some areas in the sieve begin to leak. You're going to see some components of those economies begin to struggle. You're going to see, self-actualization and self-determination being forced to return to the European continent, being forced to make a comeback in the way that these cultures are ancestrally used to and that they understand that they can do and can do well. And that's part of what this entire process is all about. But you don't, at the same time, you don't want someone's mine cart to run clear off the edge of the rails and down into a mine shaft with no way out. There has to be a balance. There has to be a net effect, if you will, a safety net of sorts, and there has to be a deliberate plan that's executed over a period of time. A big part of the situation that happened with Iran, and the reason it happened in the months leading up to the G7, in my opinion, is because all of the different effects that came out of what just occurred in the Middle East, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of them applied directly and heavily focused towards Europe. The aviation fuel crisis is a great example of that. Europeans have a lot of free passage of movement. The fuel situation for them is not quite as in your face normally as it would be here in the United States of America, with all the different automobiles and things that we have, which they don't usually have in Europe because it's not practical, it's not pragmatic, it doesn't make much sense to have the quantity, the sizes, the styles, etc., that is over here across the Atlantic. But the airline component, the air and the ability to travel from Europe to most of the rest of the world through air, that's a big deal. And that's what is customary for a lot of ancestral and native Europeans as they grow up and experience life on their continent. And so leading up to these meetings, we've had this entire situation occur that has refined the focus of a lot of the different segments across the entirety of the European citizenry. You've got the Britons heavily focused on their issues now that have been made a little bit worse. You have the Germans heavily focused on theirs in the same fashion. The French are out en masse. Literally, I saw fires around the Eiffel Tower just a few weeks ago. And as I understand it, that was from some unrest that was going on regarding a sporting match. But regardless, you're seeing this pressure keg turned up a little bit more and a little bit more each time, but it's allowing for a redefinition, a redoing of things. You're seeing projects advance forward in certain European countries. The expansion of nuclear power, for example, and access to nuclear power. A couple of them are talking about that and have been in recent weeks. You're seeing the German Alternative for Deutschland party making a central pillar of their message, the reindustrialization of Germany, which ancestrally has always been a very strong and resource manufacturing rich part of the European continent. And you're also seeing discussion now across 4 separate European countries, Spain, France, Germany, and England, about opening up some sort of a dialogue with Russia and with Moscow directly, and basically stating openly, we should rely on the friends that we have ancestrally and the friends that we have in our region, and we should not be so reliant upon the big NATO polar bear called called the United States of America.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I agree with that. And how do you think this is all going to play out? Because you see, Netanyahu and Trump, they're kind of like, Trump's kind of pulling away from him. Not that I think Bibi is our puppet, and Trump's the puppeteer. But there's a lot of negativity coming out from Israel right now. So how do you think this is all going to transpire here in the coming days with everything that's going on?
Well, it would be speculation, but the most likely avenues forward to me with respect to the deep state opponent that we still face, that still has some elements of leverage and influence across Europe and North America and certainly Africa and the Middle East, it seems to be that there has to be more rattling of the cage before there can be less. We've not extracted the Muslim Brotherhood from Cairo and from the broader Egyptian landscape, and frankly, Tunisia and Libya as well. We've not extracted the intelligence community factions of Hezbollah, of which there are many, out of Lebanon, and actually dealt with them in one way or another, whether that's a law enforcement operation, whether it's a military conflagration, whatever occurs, this is a faction that has to be dealt with. We've not yet reached a point where certain countries in South America are fully stabilized, in my opinion. I think that you're still seeing a lot of inter-co-op drug wars happening in certain nations, to include Chile and to include Peru, which are, excuse me, I think Chile shares a border with Argentina, and Peru, if it doesn't share a border, it's very close to Argentina. And so these are areas that also have to be, rattled a little bit more. And so as we look at how this moves forward, I think we have to talk about it through region rather than by, the entirety of planetary mechanics, because we're going to see regional events, I think, in sequence in such a way that it's sort of like non-linear, but providing a linear channel, if you will. And so Israel, again, has that axe to grind with Turkey. That axe is ancestral. It goes back a long, long time. The same axe exists in the other direction with the Egyptians. The intelligence factions sprinkled all throughout make that that surface level geopolitical action possible and necessary, unfortunately, in many ways. The situation with Russia and Ukraine is absolutely going to expand. And, we've been talking about this for a long time. And I think we've underestimated here in the West just how patient the Russians really can be. And it's no wonder that historically, they're very, very difficult, if nigh impossible, to defeat in an actual warfare situation, pound for pound on the ground. Because as the Russians have continued to attrit the Ukrainian military, the Ukrainian defensive industry, their connections to the broader NATO defense industrial base, they're very slowly biding their time, doing their thing, fighting warfare in the way that they're ancestrally used to fighting it, which is inexpensive, lots of common sense, and a lot of practical logic employed at the ground level. But we're also seeing a very large amassing of troops in the southeast of Ukraine and in the far eastern components of Belarus, the northwestern area where Belarus, Russia, and the Baltic states all come together. So Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. And so these buildups, to me, Jenny, are almost certainly in preparation for something that is coming. And we know that the Russians have said, in not so many words over the last 6 weeks, our patience is beginning to wear out. the situation with Kiev, the constant reinforcement from NATO, the technology that NATO is continuing to give to Kiev, and the Ukrainian neo-Nazi regime, the coordination from NATO state and non-state actors inside of Ukraine on behalf of Ukraine, waging war against Russia, private Western corporations integrating their targeting systems with the Ukrainian Intelligence Directorate and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and War, enabling that conflict with Russia. So all of these feeders play into wearing out the patience of the bear, if you will, and they've essentially declared as much in the last month and a half that they're starting to get tired of it. I'm looking for a significant expansion in that conflict in the next 6 to 8 weeks, certainly before the big autumn season begins to set in, because that's when the temperatures really begin to drop in Eastern Europe, late fall and into the early winter. And I would expect significant action between now and then, potentially enough action to completely end the war and have the question of the Baltic states, if not territorially, on the table with respect to surface level mechanics, certainly as part of any sort of behavioral modulation with respect to a treaty that comes after that. And ultimately, Jenny, I want to just clarify this, because we haven't even talked about Asia yet. That's a whole separate discussion, right? But when we look at what's happening inside of Eastern Europe, I think that we still have a couple more levels to go. And the reason I say that is because up until 1918, and really not in a complete fashion until the close of World War II, what is currently Belarus, the Baltic states, and most of the Ukrainian countryside, nearly all of Ukraine except for the Lvov Oblast in the very far west of the nation, almost all of that was ancestrally Russian and traces a Russian lineage back over 1,000 years. So when you look at the city of Vilnius, for example, a port city in Lithuania, when you look at Odessa, port city in Ukraine, the biggest port on the Black Sea. When you look at Estonia and the Baltic Sea ports that exist there, when you look at Belarus and the rolling grasslands and really what amounts to a combination of a gemstone and agrarian basin inside of that area of the continent, these are lands that ancestrally have been Russian for hundreds and hundreds of years. They only got fragmented as a result of the New World Order, Nazi World Order manipulation that came out of World War I and World War II. And while the entirety of that map is not necessarily feasible to write and correct in the present day and time, there are certain components of it which absolutely are. We still have the Kaliningrad situation that has to be resolved, which ties all the way back to ancestral Prussia and the dynamic between them and the Russian Tsar. We have questions about the territorial integration of Belarus and Russia that have not been answered yet, but are certainly in the pipeline, because there's been a referendum just in the last 2 years about how Belarusians would feel if there was more of an integration and a rejoining, if you will, of the Belarusian countryside with Moscow, the home city, the Slavic home city, if you will. The Ukraine situation is self-explanatory, because up until the 1980s and 1990s, most of Ukraine was still a part of that post-Soviet Union period. So all of this to say, what's happening in Eastern Europe is extremely likely to inflame much, much more and involve many more areas of territory, if not kinetically in combat, certainly at the negotiating table, as far as concessions and appeasements for everyone, for all parties on all sides to get along and not escalate it to a point of severe destruction.
Damn, I have some homework to do. See, everybody, this is why I do what I do. I have SG. He comes on and he talks about the world, geopolitics, everybody. Like that, I have not even I'm in that a little bit, but not to that depth. So this is SG and on. This is his lane. He does a great job at it. But that was a lot of great information, SG. I'm sitting here taking notes as you're talking. So thank you for that. And I will go do some research on all this, but that's powerful. So thank you, SG. Real quickly before we go into some questions here, since we are talking about Israel a little bit, not a lot of people out there talk about, you hear Huckabee out there, he's calling, Israel first, right? Not America first. Talk about these dual citizenships that many of these politicians have. Because that's not been a topic, and I know one of my audience members wanted me to bring it up, and I think you're a perfect person to talk to about these dual citizenships that they have. Can you maybe touch a little bit on that? And I mean, obviously, that's just traitorous, right? So, yeah, if you want to touch on that a little bit, that'd be awesome.
Well, it's an interesting concept, the dual citizenry argument. And I think there's I really do think the hard line defining moment for dual citizenry is the public-private, border. If you go from a private life in personal capacity to now you're in the public life and you're making decisions on behalf of others, you can only have one allegiance, and that is to the others that you're making those decisions on behalf of, whoever that is. Could be the dog catcher in your community. It could be all the way up to the president of the United States. Outside of that, I think that there's a lot of capacity in the world right now for people to do what they want. But where it becomes, sort of like an Achilles heel or a major catch-22 for what remains of our deep state opponent is the dual citizen aspect has been relied on for a long time to effect what amounts to foreign agent change inside of different nations. And that could be from the U.S. exporting it somewhere else. It could be others exporting the same influence to the U.S. via U.S. citizens that have adopted dual citizenry or immigrants that have come from other countries but refuse to renounce theirs. And so when you look at that and you look at the constellation of dual citizenry across the political landscape, well, that's that public office domain that I referenced just a moment ago. And I think that's where everything changes. If there is a serious national emergency situation that can be tied to some sort of foreign state involvement, much like 9/11 was tied very quickly to the foreign state involvement of Afghanistan, Pakistan, certain terrorist cells that had assistance from different groups. I think there was a group named in Syria in those initial investigations. Then that foreign state involvement becomes very, very entrapping very quickly, because at the outset and on its face, someone who has a dual citizenry with a foreign state implicated in something like that, who is also an office holder or a public official that has some clout and some effect and some ability to cause and influence real change inside of the institutions of power, those individuals stand out like a sore thumb. They become opportunity number one as far as investigation and questioning. And that leaves out, of course, the fleshing out of culpability, because that still has to happen. Due process in many ways does have to happen. And that due process, if you want to think about it in these terms, while military law doesn't guarantee due process, military law does guarantee a thorough accounting, a thorough investigation of how things webbed themselves together. And so you would still have JAG components that would need to do the asking and the questioning. You would still have prosecutorial teams and investigators, probably both military and civilian, that would have to look into whatever had occurred and try to find those nodes and figure out how they juncted together at different points along the way, and where they were conjoined and where they weren't conjoined, and whether this person actually had foreknowledge of this event or that thing which led to that event, and so on and so forth. And so individuals like the current ambassador to Israel, individuals like several members of the leftist side of the Congress, to include a very famous representative out of Minnesota, all of these types of individuals become sort of opportunity number one, or priority number one, if there is a serious emergent event domestically that has the implication of being more than just a disaster or an accident, but an actual foreign state inspired or foreign state supported event here in the United States. And I've maintained for a long time that until we leave this current geopolitical landscape behind, there's always going to be the risk of some foreign infestation. So there has to be a moment or a circumstance or a sequence of events or a short period of time, whatever it ends up looking like as we look back from the future on these times and on this era. There has to be something that happens which causes the foreign infestation of the United States of America to recede, either that being intercepted and destroyed, whether that be by those foreign infestors and influential opportunists removing themselves voluntarily because of the fear of being investigated and destroyed. Whatever it happens to be, those tentacles have to come out of the United States in the same way that the tentacles from our Federal Reserve have to come out of everybody else. And so dual citizenry and public officials that have knowledge of foreign nation state activities, potentially espionage activities, they are going to be, again, priority number one for any sort of enforcement action if there is a serious emergency that comes that can be connected not to an organic accident, but a legitimate action on behalf of another government or state actor.
Thank you, SG. All right, everybody, we're going to go into some questions here for the audience. If you have a question, we're streaming live over here on Rumble and X. If you have a question for SG, please put it in the comment area and I will read it to SG. And here on Telegram, please raise your hand if you guys have a question. I will unmute your mic. Okay, so here's a couple questions for you here on Telegram real quick. Okay, Lucy Lou says, so this is kind of a comment. So we're all expecting something to happen before the 5th of July, and he's saying the opposite. Like, what are we to believe? So I guess the question would kind of be to hear to you, SG. What do you believe? Because we know there's a lot of stuff that's going to transpire up before the 4th of July and then there on after, right? In through next year. But what is your opinion on all of that about the 4th of July? Because she's feeling like there's something that you're saying, that something that maybe you're saying something the opposite of something may not be happening. I guess she's a little bit confused on what to believe. She's like, time to give up hope. No, never give up hope, everybody.
Well,
Stay hopeful. A lot of great things are happening.
it's interesting, Jenny, and I totally, first of all, I totally empathize with the comment because I paid $3.58 a gallon today for gasoline, whereas normally it is in this area where I live about $2.50. Adjusted for certain inflation metrics. At one point, it was down as low as $1.90. But
Shit, I'm at $6 a gallon, $5.99 right now. I have to do the premium.
there you go. So in that way, I completely empathize with the comment. But I think the person who asked the question isn't hearing all of what I'm trying to say. So let me try and lay it out in a way that is a little bit more clear and a little bit better intelligible, a little bit more digestible. When we talk
Thank
about
you.
something happening or things happening or this occurring or that occurring, you know, along the way throughout the entire Biden administration, as this alternative news ecosystem began to get off the ground, and people began to start things like podcasts and audio casts and citizen reports and journalist reports and travel reports from on scene and things like that. During that entire period of time, I think a lot of individuals out there were extremely focused on the major events, which are singular in nature, which have to occur. And one of those events, of course, would be the shuttering of the Federal Reserve in some form. We know that has to come. It's probably going to be absorbed by the Treasury so that it's not as reverberative and destructive around the entirety of the world. We know that at some point along the way, there's going to have to be an extraction of the Antifa elements, the foreign infestation, the Soros prosecutors, all of the different foreign paramilitary and militarized actors that are here in the United States of America, who themselves are separate from the migrant class. We know that the migrant class itself has to be dealt with in many ways. You might have 10 or 15% that are worth actually, extending an opportunity to, perhaps allowing them, a visa with conditions. But most of that, if not all of that class, is going to need to go back to where they're originally from, if nothing else, to help rebuild those societies once these broader geopolitical maneuvers are taken care of. So, and that doesn't even get into COVID, the election of 2020, setting that right, the Russiagate, treason, conspiracy, all of that. So when we talk about something happening, I think a lot of people are focused on one of about a dozen different topics. And I just laid out what several of those topics are. But we're not seeing all of the machinations, all of the movements, all of the preparation, all of the build out, all of the conglomeration of aspects that are needed to carry those types of events forward. We have to have a media ecosystem that is dominantly on our side before we start pulling some of those off. That's one of the very first things we have to do. We have to get control of certain portions of the US government. We've been doing that over the last 15 months, even with Trump's recent executive order that he gave out, which further integrates military and civilian intelligence sharing. That process is still underway. We just saw FISA expire for the first time in over a decade at this point, which is a massive win on behalf of, the non-surveillance state class, the group of patriots out there, of which I belong, that champions this idea of a digital bill of rights, an internet bill of rights. Certain surveillance should only be by consent, and clear and precise and informed consent, right? And certain conditions should not be allowed to be denied to individuals out there without some of that same consent. So, looking at some of these wins that are happening, the take back of the U.S. government institutions, the reduction of fraud, the shifting of the manufacturing base all around the world, the onshoring of intellectual property again, and wealth and treasure and industrial wealth and industrial strength to the United States, the securing of many of our more vulnerable systems, the integration of very advanced logarithmic and software coding systems into U.S. government functions and activities for purposes of facilitating their speed. And I understand the concern that many have about, well, those systems can be frauded. They absolutely can, but we still have to speed them up and bring them into present day, or we can't have any of this, Nasera Jacera style landscape post when all of these things are set right, because we have to be set up in order to do that. And so when we talk about the 4th, we talk about the 250th birthday month of America. Things aren't going to just stop in July and us have an emergency broadcast and everything magically be made right. But it is very possible. As a matter of fact, I would even characterize it as probably more plausible than not that we see something in July which begins to kick the ball down the road in a really big way. Something like an election 2020 investigation being announced, something like arrests being announced as a result of what DNI Gabbard, former DNI Gabbard, had put out at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. We know that we have ongoing grand jury investigations, which are still going, still taking in evidence and still signing off and declaring warrants related to the 2020 election ad hoc through the entirety of the nation. We have the investigation of COVID is now going on inside of NIH and has been, we were recently told, has been going on for at least the last 6 to 9 months. We know DNI also has been involved in the COVID and COVID origins and how that, comes back to things. Well, that's the intelligence community's front press office, essentially, which means the entirety of the intelligence community is also investigating that activity, also investigating the election, also investigating some of these other events. And so we have so much going. It's like playing a piano and trying to hyper focus on every single resonant chord all at the same time. You simply cannot do it. You cannot focus on the lower end of the octaves and the tremolos and the upper ends of the octaves and all of the different carry notes in between and the melodic lines and the harmonies. You're not going to be able to comprehend each individual string ringing as a result of the hammer strike that's coming. But as you watch the whole of the presentation, that it seamlessly ties together and it creates a masterpiece. And that's what we're dealing with right now. You're seeing the masterpiece created. We're watching the piano being played, but we just have plugs in our ears because a lot of that piano cannot be played for the public yet, because the build out for the melody, the build out for the harmony, the carrying through of all the different lines for the measures and the keys and how things are going to shift from one, compositional area to the next and so on and so forth. It's not been built out fully yet, but it's well underway and has been since Trump took office in 2025. And I would submit to you, Jenny, on the military side, it's been going on for many, many years. A lot of this information that's breaking forth to the public is coming as a result of the military under President Trump and the actions that were taken to secure the broad U.S. government. So with respect to all of that, I hear the person and their question. I hear the concerns that they're dealing with. I understand, what do you mean we have to wait longer? But I don't think that it's a waiting process or a non-waiting process. I think it's an observational process each and every day, week to week, month to month as we go forward. July 4th, 2026 is certainly going to kick off something, but that something will reverberate. We will continue to see more strings added to the piano's harmony and melodies. We will continue to see more actions coming from the government on this major talking point or on that major talking point. We will continue to see, just like we saw recently in congressional testimony, the exposure of activities like biological terrorism and the U.S. government's portion of that and part in that and how that was done in various areas of the world. And ultimately, it leads us to a place where a pretty significant picture of out-and-out international criminality on a scale that has never been achieved before in such a coordinated way, that includes the spoke of election fraud, that includes the spoke of biological and chemical terrorism, that includes the spoke of usury and counterfeiting, that all of these different spokes make up the broad wheel, the broad pie, if you will, of what that criminality actually looks like. And that's when we begin to deal with the top fish. But on the way to that, you're going to see staffers, congressional representatives, former and potentially current, certainly individuals in private think tanks, individuals from private foundations, individuals working on behalf of very involved nonprofits such as the SPLC and anything aligned with George Soros. All of these organizations and professionals and individuals and wheels and gears from these various arenas, institutionally and organizationally, you have to go through them first, and that's going to be a public vet out process as well. When President Trump talks about patriots winning so much they're going to get tired of winning, I think the man actually means it. As we look at prosecuting and holding to account everything that has happened here while simultaneously shifting the system back to where it needs to be, more and more closely aligned with the Constitution instrument, more and more closely sovereign and autonomous with what the Treasury of the United States and of the rest of the world, each sovereign state, was always supposed to be. You're going to see the expose, the prosecution, and the administration of accountability at different levels all through this process. And we know that that last level will ultimately be a military commission for certain individuals that were involved in serious crimes, in serious terrorism, and in serious destruction, not just in the United States, but worldwide.
I agree with you 100%. And I want to say, I thought I read something the other day about they were going after Soros and his conglomerate, if you will. So I'll have to go back and look at that. But yeah, I think I saw something about that yesterday, or not yesterday, but a couple days ago. Okay, so here is this is regarding the data center. So there's a question here on Telegram, and then one over here on Rumble, but they're both about the data centers. So here, okay, so Unsilent Majority says, SG, can you tell us what all these data centers are for? And then here we have over here on Telegram, Sherry says, hi, SG and Jen. My question is about the data centers. I am curious of the 6,000 patents of technology that will be released will be made in all these data centers. If not, then why do we need as many that are coming? And also, do we need solar farms? I thought we were going to zero free energy. So everybody's concerned about these. I think everybody's getting the wrong idea about these data centers. I don't believe that they are going to be taking up all this water and everything that everybody's talking about, because Donald Trump talks about all the water that's below our feet and above our head. And I think there's a bigger thing going on with these data centers. And I also want to maybe think it has something to do with the Iron Dome. But yeah, if you want to add to that, SG, please go for it.
Well, the data center question is one that, I have to walk two lines with as well. And I think a lot of patriots out there feel the same way. On the one hand, it's obvious that there can come from this type of a project, and from the way it's being done, there can be serious wrongs done to the population. You can have eminent domain, which personally, and this is my own personal opinion, I don't agree with, and I think that that is a misinterpretation of the Constitution instrument that has occurred in our history. But you also have acoustic weapon concerns. You have the frequency effect on birds, insects, bee life, etc. All of these things are real, and I don't want to minimize the discussion by sort of caking it as like a pie in the sky thing. However, I think we have to acknowledge that we are moving to a quantum way of life. How are we going to do that? And how are we going to power our missile and armament defensive base, not from a contractor standpoint, but from a decentralized, community-focused standpoint, state by state here in the United States and broadly at that federal Pentagon level? And how are we going to power the money of the digital age, what we would call the cryptocurrency precious metal landscape? And I think that's really what we're coming into, whether it is the current stablecoin repertoire, whether we see something refined further, whether there is an amendment or several amendments to the Constitution that come out which enshrine certain restrictions on centralization of finance and decentralization of finance. Whatever happens with that, I think that we're going to see a digital physical world blend, a precious metal digital monetary landscape blending. And the digital side of that has to have channels, it has to have rails, it has to be able to get up and going and move. And so with respect to AI, which is what the data centers really are in existence for, and what they're heralding and sort of pioneering as we come out the gate here, all of that ultimately, in my opinion, must come back to the people from a stance of total influence and control, or it will become the death of the people. We're literally walking that much of a razor blade here. But at the same time, President Trump has said about AI and about the data centers, we are giving things back to the people that they don't even know about. These are comments that the man has made. We're pioneering a new way of life, and I'm paraphrasing right now, but we're pioneering a new way of life. We're building a quantum age. We want that quantum leap in the standard of living, not just for America, but for the entirety of the world. We want freedom cities again that bask in the glow of what they represent around the world. And in order to get there, there has to be a digital powerhouse. There has to be a power plant put into place. And so I think the data center issue is serving a lot of different purposes. One of the purposes is creating the landscape and infrastructure necessary to roll out a blended monetary landscape, a monetary ecosystem that is capable of supporting both physical world and digital world exchange. And you need the capacity to do that. You also have the national defense component, which is supremely important important when you look at the last 100 years alone. That doesn't even get into the history, but just the last 100 years alone, we've had several major worldwide conflicts spawn out because something as small as a false flag event that was spawned off by someone with a handgun at different points along the way, or someone with a few bombs and a few airplanes cause. And so we have to be able to secure that landscape and track and trace it, not from a surveilling the population standpoint, but from surveilling our own electro space around us, making sure that malign actors are not getting in, that plans for certain devastating events are not able to get off the ground, that things are thwarted in enough time to allow law enforcement to do their job with dignity and nobility and effectiveness. And so the AI component actually does play into that as well. But again, all of that has to come back to we the people taking the reins, we the people taking control. And so this period of time becomes the time, I think, where we decide, are we going to completely nix the argument and send ourselves backwards in time? And that doesn't make much sense to me, but there are individuals that are completely for that, and some of their points are totally defensible. Are we going to allow the technocratic class to usher us into a corral that we don't want, which obviously is antagonistic to our best interest and should not be pursued? Or are we and find a way to deal with these powerful enough can begin to self-correct, and you can actually cause a lot of, or excuse me, you can move the
You're
things
rubber
like the
banding.
watershed, the planetary concerns, the things like the effect on frequency and resonance and acoustics in the area. All of that, in my opinion, Jenny, can be handled and built out. It's just a matter of hardware and the types of things that we're using. And I want to close this segment with the last jumping off point that occurred to me in research very recently. If we have 6,000 plus data centers currently under construction or planned, and we know that we do, based on publicly released information, how are we going to move to a 0-point landscape if we don't have transducer nodes and transformer outlets and power stations that are equipped with those types of harnessing and proliferation capabilities? The answer is we can't. The Earth generates so much electromagnetic energy that our current power grid would fry in about 10 minutes being connected up to it. So we're seeing the grid itself forced into an upgrade mode from this very data center project. And that has the byproduct, the indirect effect of strengthening the whole of the power supply, while also forcing the questions of who ultimately retains control of the data center, who ultimately is accountable for the effect of those centers on the community, the watershed, the environment, the people, the residential areas around them, and who ultimately is in control of the newly decentralized power grid of the United States of America.
Great response, SG. Thank you for that. And then to everybody, like SG said, and Donald Trump has said it, he's giving it all back to us, we the people, right? So what they had meant for bad, because these data centers, they were not going to be good for us. We can turn it into something good for us. And if we are coming into this quantum world, like, everything that SG talked about, from medical to, everything. Even the Iron Dome is being tied to these data centers. So, it's going to need something like a data center or many to be able to hold all of that quantum. So thank you for that. That was great, SG. So I appreciate that, because that's a big concern with a lot of people out there with the data centers. I don't think they're diving they're not going deeper into the data center research to maybe find out what you had just explained. So I appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to go over here on the front side. We've got a couple hands that were raised. So Sun C, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Jenny. Hi, SG.
Hello.
So my question is, right now we are information war. How is Space Force stand?
That's a fantastic question. And you're exactly right. We are at the end of the day, it's a multi-level war. It's a multi-dimensional war, but information is the most publicly interactive area of that war that we, the people, are currently fielding and dealing with. And Space Force has given us the edge, quite frankly, that we need. Space Force was the group that enabled control of certain secret space programs to be brought under Pentagon command. Space Force allowed for partnerships with certain governmental and non-governmental entities, private contractors, to become scrutinized and fall under military domain and under military procurement law and enforcement and policy and regulations that apply to that. Space Force also allowed for, in my opinion, a detached information component of the United States military, which has been entrusted with some of the most, some of the most sensitive communications that military command across the entirety of the United States has needed to exchange from one side to another. Space Force a few years ago, I think it was 2023, became the fully integrative one-stop shop communication outlet for the entirety of the United States military. All messaging sent from one joint force to the other went through the Space Force and still does. And so looking at what's happening right now in the present day and time, Space Force's role, in my opinion, is to enable the information war to proliferate and expand and ultimately to consume our opponent, because our opponent has relied on hiding, on deception, on staying in the shadows, on secret, on the deftness and the deference, if you will, of that traitorous legacy media in order to enact all of the different things that they have done to we the people, not just in the United States, but in all countries worldwide. And so that consumption from a new open source information ecosystem, reining in and absorbing that old ecosystem, it pulls everybody's pants down. It shows everyone behind the curtains with their underwear on, and it helps us to see and move the needle forward in a way that carries forth the conversations like the one that we're having now at the national level. You have conversations occurring out of the presidency of the United States about securing national elections, about making certain that other nations are adhering to their best faith agreements, about ensuring resource independence, that everyone should have, industrial manufacturing bases and economic independence of their own right, that they should maximize what they have to offer to the world. All of these coming straight from the office of the presidency. The Congress of the United States having discussions on UAPs, UFOs, non-terrestrial biologics, secret and hidden technologies, areas of the United States military that for the last half century have been essentially unknown to the broad public. They're now being talked about in the halls of Congress. None of this would be possible without the Space Force. And in my opinion, without what the Space Force was able to catch after it was established in 2019 with the launch of COVID and the 2020 theft of the presidential election here in the United States.
Thank you, SG. Did that answer your question?
Oh, yes. Can I ask you another one? Another one would be I hear that Trump has an air rise. How much the air rise? Is it a building that permit is an air rise, or he has all the atmosphere here air rise? So I just want to get together a vision. Myself as a Space Force is also the information would so much information in atmospheres or whatever relate to. So I just wonder how much the Trump has air rise.
Well, let me make sure that I understand the question. If we're talking about the rights throughout the airspace and throughout the broad atmospheric airspace worldwide, certainly over the United States of America, Space Force is crucial for that. Space Force does all of the monitoring of the upper atmosphere, all of the monitoring of communication that goes throughout the entirety of the United States military, all of the surveillance that has to be done in order to maintain that, the digestion, the decrypting and encrypting of those messaging platforms, and how those information funnels are created. None of it is possible without the Space Force. And again, I don't want to sound too repetitive here, but it is just so important. The Space Force's creation essentially publicized and placed under public chain of command authority the secret space programs of both the Air Force and the Navy. The Navy had some of that overlay with the Air Force that began in the 1950s. They kept some of their own compartments, which are still under U.S. Naval Special Operations groups. But most, if not all, of the secret space components that dealt with that upper atmosphere domain, that dealt with that airspace, and the rights of whatever's happening in those airspaces across the world was compartmentalized very heavily under NASA, the U.S. Air Force, and the U.S. Army Intelligence Directorate. And so what we have now, again, is this this singularity that was created amongst the mix. And from that singularity, I think that we have proliferated an extreme exposure, not only in the actual events occurring in the world, but those events that are only digital in nature, that are being sort of talked about, forecast as perhaps not having occurred yet. And when we look at the real enemy which the real enemy is fairly insular and basically limits itself to the Luciferian central banking class and the Luciferian warlord class, which intersects with that central banking class. They're the same class at certain international levels. You see them at Bilderberg Group meetings, NATO Arctic Council meetings, things of that nature. All of those individuals and those entities and groups, those blocks of influence, are made completely vulnerable and disempowered by what the Space Force allows and has allowed since 2019. There had to be a consolidation of secretive programs inside the U.S. Pentagon into the public chain of command so that they could be reclaimed and captured and purged. And in my opinion, that consolidation began well before Space Force. It began as early as Admiral Mike Rogers, 2015, 2016, the election of 2016, the rapid special forces activities that began almost immediately after Trump's election in 2016, moving all the way into the inaugural period of 2017. I think the preparation for the transition to what Space Force became was going on as early as those days. But it was so crucial to have that fort on the battlefield, to have that centralized HQ on behalf of we the people, because without it, there was no way to track and trace and follow where all of this criminality eventually leads us around the world.
Thank you,
Thank you
SG.
very much.
Thank you, Sunsi. All right, Mark, go ahead. Your mic is unmuted.
Oh, hi, Jenny. And it's a pleasure
Hello.
to talk to SG. My question kind of goes down a rabbit hole. It's about Russia and Ukraine. And I wanted to get your opinion, SG. Let me give you my position and then give me your expert opinion. I call the 5-year Russia-Ukraine war a wag the dog war. I believe that Putin went in and took out biolabs and rescued children. I believe that Russia could take Ukraine in 2 weeks and take Kiev. I believe we haven't seen any footage of this war in I don't know how many years, yet when one missile makes it into Israel, we see that immediately. And finally, Zelensky went to see Trump at the White House last year sometime, and I remember Trump saying, if it wasn't for our help, Russia could take you inside of a month. And Zelensky's response was 2 weeks. So I believe that this has been a wag the dog war. And I know you're kind of an expert on what goes on outside of the United States. Can you give me your opinion on if we're looking at central casting here?
Oh, absolutely. I think that you're looking at central casting everywhere. But I do want to clarify with central casting, I think that you have components of this broader process, we'll call it this broader sequence of operations that all sort of dovetail together with one another, that are relying on central casting pieces, but those pieces are causing the gears to turn. And so in some ways, I think that you've got parts of the Ukraine war that have been very real and very vicious. The areas around Dnipropetrovsk, and I'm not pronouncing that correctly, it starts with a DNOP, the war being fought around that area, very, very vicious, but there's a lot of underground systems there. We know that there's a cavern system that is just south of that area that's on topographical maps. And prior to the instability in Ukraine 2014, it was a tourist location. So we know that exists in that area. We know that certain areas around Odessa has the largest catacomb system in all of Southeast Europe. And so that has to be cleaned out. That has to be, prosecuted to the extent that it can be. And that's why I continue to tell people I expect a Russian advance on Odessa to absolutely happen, not only for the symbology of it, but the kinetic need to clean out parts of that arena. And Odessa happens to be Ukraine's largest port city, and port cities are always a focus of black market crime because it's a way to rapidly move from one jurisdictional protection to another. But broadly speaking, with what you're talking about, I absolutely believe that you have a situation in Eastern Europe, Ukraine being the biggest focus of it, but certainly not the only one, that is wagging the dog of NATO in a very, very big way, because the Russians are accomplishing multiple missions in the same way that the United States military accomplishes multiple missions on its deployments when it's not being manipulated by that military industrial complex. The Iran situation that's gone on in the last 90 days is a phenomenal example. We've seen lots of different objectives achieved through the deployment of the military in the form and in the fashion that it was, just in that conflict, just in months. The Russians play a similar game, but their game just tends to be a little bit longer and much more patient historically. They're a lot more cautious, in other words. They're not quite as wild west of spirit as we here in the United States of America are at that military level. But their military planners are, in my opinion, pretty much equitable in many regards. I would say in some cases you've got superiority on one side or the other. Americans are better at this, Russians are better at that. But by and large, you have a lot of equivalent minds and equivalent talent, I think, planning those operations. And so all of what's going on in Ukraine, in my estimation, is purposed to do three major things: to totally destroy NATO's defense industrial base completely, and really tax and choke out the corporate landscape behind that, because you've got all these disastrous policies inside of the NATO nations that are causing exactly that further upstream. You also have the integration, what's the word? The intersecting is not the right word that I'm looking for. Interdiction is the word I'm looking for, of significant militarized crimes in Ukraine, trafficking of women and children at an organizational and state-based level, industrial biological warfare experimentation happening there on the ground in Ukraine, weapons development, underground systems being built and connected to countries like Turkey, certainly to countries to the west and southwest of Ukraine, like Hungary. It's one of the reasons Moldova is such an important part of that entire discussion. And then also on top of that, you've got the broad dragging out of that electioneering, if you will, the election and corruption landscape that exists here in the United States of America, because so much of it utilizes money that has been washed through Ukraine, really going back a number of decades. It's not just been since 2014. It goes all of the way back to 2002, 3, 4 time frame, and really moving forward and advancing in a dramatic way under Obama. So how do you get all of that undone? Well, you need a short period of military conflict. You need military domain. You need to be able to take the straps off of the wrists and get your hands dirty and do what has to happen. And so I think the Russians are doing that. But one of the things that is happening as a result of it is you're seeing this massive disinformation campaign aimed at the NATO components of the Western world. And when we talk about NATO components, it's not just the citizenry, but they happen to be in the middle. It's the governmental actors, it's the intelligence factions, it's the mercenary warlords, it's all of the different infrastructures that enable the mercenary complex to work. It's the funneling of weaponry, it's the funneling of money, it's the funneling out of the country of illicit substances. All of that has to be disinformation, if you will, and given information that makes it difficult to read the landscape, because the Russians, at the end of the day, also have a real job that has to be done. So as we look at this, and we were talking in the call earlier about this conflict expanding, Belarus has some of the same problems, not nearly to the level that has gone on in the Ukrainian countryside due to the strongman Lukashenko and the government that they've had, the coalition they've had in Belarus for a long time. But some of those corridors and pathways and some of those trafficking and infestation and infiltration pathways run through Belarus, from the Baltic states through Belarus to Ukraine, and vice versa. And they also run through the far west of Belarus into Poland, into Kaliningrad, and then back across the north, the southern portion of the North Sea into France and the Belgium area, Brussels. So all of that has to be stopped. All of that has to be, put out. Fires have to be localized and neutralized. And I believe that's what's happening with Russia. And it's why I expect the conflict to get a little bit bigger before it concludes. But like yourself, I do not expect this to have some sort of endless, non-foregone conclusion where we don't have any idea when the war ends. I very, very astutely believe that the Russians are there on a timetable. They have a time frame that they've given themselves before they get very, very hands-on and very physical with it. And I think that time frame is not long in the wings.
Thank you, SG. I just received your message. Do you have time for 2 quick ones here on Telegram?
I do have time for one more. I don't think I can field 2, unfortunately.
Okay, so this one is from Christy Moore. Is the country prepared for the majority of the people that are unaware of what's going on, what most of us would address as sleeping? So her question is, are these people that are still sleeping with their heads in the sand prepared for what's coming? Probably not. Go ahead, SG.
You know, that is such a perfect poetic question to close the call with today, Jenny, because it really is all about that. And it gets almost redundant and tiresome to hear. And I understand that from patriots. You know, I've been watching these types of events going on in the world since really 2012, 2013, when I really started paying attention to what the Hussein Obama administration was doing, how that tied into the Illuminati class, how that class was manipulating certain components of geopolitics around the planet. So I get it. There is a deep desire to just move the needle, right? Let's rip the Band-Aid off, show them what needs to be shown. And I do think that we are much, much further along now than we were even 2 years ago, even on the 2024 campaign trail. You've got so much awakening that has happened to the foreign nation state infestation in the United States and the levers that those nation state interests are able to pull. You've got way more awakening with respect to how economically dependent we are on only a few areas of the world when we really do have to be decentralized. It doesn't mean we need to be disconnected, but we have to have redundancies built into the system. There have to be fail safes. We can't rely on just the United States or on just the European bloc or on just the India-China axis, you know, in South Asia, or on just the African Union for the African nation states. But it has to be a conglomeration of all of them, and there has to be some balance brought to that. And so we're much more aware of that now than we were even 2 years ago. You're seeing a lot of what I would characterize as the intellectual left, separate from the radical left, that have begun to appreciate the center line a lot more about the topics that we're talking about, and more so the Make America Healthy Again coalition really arose on that 2024 campaign trail in a big way. And that has brought much more awareness to the immunity that certain manufacturers get and certain medical entities and institutions get when really they don't necessarily need that immunity, or perhaps they shouldn't have that immunity. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Excuse me, that discussion. You've got nutrition now. You've got the Surgeon General of the United States of America talking about metabolic disorder as being the main driver of health failures in children. And metabolic disorders can be interdicted and in many cases made much better. You have the Health and Human Services Secretary of the United States of America bringing up vaccine contents relatively frequently, bringing up food manufacturers and how they are permitted to do certain things, or have been permitted to do certain things, but now no longer in this period of time. And so that heralds this new era, this new beginning. So the broad question is, are we ready to pull the masks off? And I think the answer is almost. As we move towards this period of time, whatever that happens to be in the United States, where the pressure domestically will be turned up significantly. We've talked about a scare event several times. I think all of us can acknowledge that there's been a lot of trepidation. There's been a lot of tempestuousness, but there's not really been a true blue scare event, something that got everybody's attention, something that causes everyone to stop what they're doing, to separate themselves from their current task, tune into the announcement, tune into the news, whatever it is. But those types of events, or events, however it turns out, that still is yet to come. And that represents, I think, our band-off moment. And I would say we're almost there, Jenny. When we look at the coalescence of all the different viewpoints I just talked about, when you look at the nationalization of the topics and talking points around geoengineering, around non-terrestrial life, around hidden technologies, around hidden medical capabilities that we have out there, the ability of healing the body that we actually have access to in deep areas of technological shadows. When we look at the coalescence in the hall of every government across the West with this idea of economic independence and centrality of control, and how good is it to be reliant on Brussels, or reliant on CERN, or reliant on Zurich or Washington D.C. versus being reliant on our own communities and our own nation state capitals and our own gifts and talents and wonders that we have to offer to the world. I think that we have a serious convergence that's been occurring, and it's been occurring slowly, surely, steadily, consistently, very steady and sort of almost in a blasé way for a number of years now, but it's establishing itself slowly as the new paradigm. And so that paradigm gets closed, that paradigm gets ushered forth with a stamp of approval, if you will, after we see those civilizational events that get the attention of the United States, and really that also get the attention of Russia and China, because those domestic citizenry, those population groups are massive. They have massive effect on what goes on inside their countries. And all of us, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans in particular, and the Europeans too, to a degree, but definitely the top three superpowers, our domestic citizenries have to be on the same page. We cannot be running with opposite programs. We cannot be proceeding forward with understandings that are not correct about how we're interacting with one another, because we will never achieve a cooperative, semi-trustworthy, semi-pleasant landscape to do business with and to transact with and to interrelate with one another with if we're running from different areas of understanding about how the reality of the world really is. So I would submit to you that whatever events have left to occur to quote unquote wake the sleepers up, they're going to have to involve the major superpowers, not just the United States of America. And I would imagine that we are, again, not very far away from that based on where our coalescence is right now.
And I agree with you 100% on that. We are not too far away from that, everybody. So with that, everybody, SG gives us typically about an hour and 15 minutes of his time. We are right there. So SG, we'll see you in a month.
Sounds wonderful.
See you
Third
next
Wednesday
month.
of July.
Yes, sir. So everybody, you heard that. So the third Wednesday of every month, SG will be back here. So you guys will know where to find him. Same time, same place. And come back here, everybody, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time for Dallas, everything RV news. And we'll see all of you then. God bless you, SG, you and your little man. And we'll talk to you soon. And everybody, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Thank you, SG.
God bless all.